Original versus reboot. I decided this time to do Spider-Man versus the Amazing Spider-Man. And I know the answer is probably obvious to everybody watching this video right now, but for shits and giggles, let's just do it, right? As far as directors go, the original Spider Man movie came out in 2002 and it was directed by Sam Raimi. And the reason why this is big is because this guy came from pretty much horror movies. I know he did some stuff after Evil Dead, so I'm not saying that that's all he was known for. He did create his own superhero in Darkman, but still, for him to be chosen to do such a tentpole character, such a big Marvel character, and one of the biggest superhero movies at this time, as far as budget goes, as far as scale, as far as mainstream you can get, and not just that, but he pulled it off. He was able to bring some of that darkness and some of that humor and some of that wholesomeness that is directly ripped from the comic, especially the early 60s comic book versions of Spider-Man. Over at The Amazing Spider-Man, we have director Mark Webb, who, sure, he might have a perfect last name to direct a Spider-Man movie. And I'm not saying his direction was bad. It's just he was going for the dark Spider-Man. He was going for a more gritty, possibly realistic, if you can describe Spider-Man at all as being realistic. This came after the Dark Knight Rage, so every movie was trying to go for that sort of look, sort of feel. Yeah, this movie does have its humor as well, but I feel like they leaned too much into the dark. I feel like even seeing Spider-Man swing around the city, it was always at nighttime, so you didn't get to fully enjoy how much of a spectacle that is. I'm going to give the win to Sam Raimi. Let's talk about actor. Actor for Peter Parker, Spider-Man. In the original, we have Tobey Maguire, who I feel like nowadays, especially, there's been a little bit of a backlash towards. I'm seeing a lot of Tobey hate. And look, maybe it's nostalgia. Maybe it's because he was the first actor that I saw, that I grew up on to play Peter Parker, to play Spider-Man. But I do feel like he was good. I think he had that nerd aspect well, that shy awkwardness, especially his scenes with Mary Jane, are very awkward, and they're supposed to be. And just the nebbish look that he has, the goofy faces that Toby makes. I buy that this is a kid who, under any other circumstances, would not be able to pick a fight with Flash Thompson. But because he has his powers, he does. And he beats him up, and he looks like the hero. In The Amazing Spider-Man, we have Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker. Look, technically, if I were to compare these two just as actors, just on their acting, and just from their other movies and performances, I might give the edge to Andrew Garfield. He is possibly the better actor just in general. And I think he gives a decent enough performance. I just never fully bought his Peter Parker. His Peter Parker was a little too cool to be the nerd. He was a little too good looking for me to believe that he couldn't get a date, or he has these awkward scenes with Gwen Stacy, which I think are acted well, but still. And his Spider-Man sure told more jokes and was more goofy than the Tobey Maguire one. So there's that plus, but because I don't also care for his Spider-Man look, the costume, they went for, like I said, a more realistic look, and they had the lenses looking different, the colors of the costume being darker. They even had him create his own web shooters, which is directly from the comics, and I do appreciate it. But I personally always bought into the idea that the web naturally came out of his wrist, that was a part of the spider bite powers. It made more sense to me. So I'm going to give the W to Tobey Maguire, and that might surprise some people, but I'm going to do it. Actresses. These two actresses aren't playing the same character technically, but they are playing the lead love interest for their respectable movies, so I'm going to pit them against each other. Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson. And yes, Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst especially, is very controversial. You could say that she too has suffered backlash from fans who didn't care for her, not only her acting, but they don't think this is the big thing with her. They don't think she was pretty enough to play Mary Jane. And I think that's bullshit. I think that's kind of messed up. I think it's look, in the comic books Mary Jane is a supermodel. Sure, sure. But I don't think that the character only had to be that for this movie. I like the idea that she lives next door from Peter Parker. I like the fact that they grew up together. I like the fact that she still is the popular girl in school. She still is somebody that people are sort of competing with, trying to go out with her or get her attention. Even Harry Osborn tries to talk to her at the school field trip. But I do think that the character is written the most like Mary Jane in this first movie, with some of the stuff that she says, her issues at home with her father. I think, as far as Mary Jane goes, this was a good performance. But in The Amazing Spider Man, I'm going to give the win to Emma Stone, who plays Gwen Stacy. Not only is Emma Stone very believable as this high school girl who has a crush on Peter, but she also seems like a genuine nice person. She tutors Flash Thompson. She goes around and stops him from bullying people. And with Peter Parker, especially after he loses his uncle, she's trying to help him. She's trying to be there for him every time she sees him in the school hallways. She's trying to hug him. She invites him to dinner with her family. She's just trying everything that she can to not only help this kid out, but also she's straightforward. She shows her interest and she's proactive. She's not as much of the damsel in distress like Mary Jane. Yes, in the first Spider-Man movie, Mary Jane gets endangered 3 or maybe 4 times. But in the Amazing Spider-Man, Gwen Stacy puts herself out there to help Spider-Man, to help create a cure and to be involved in the plot, not just be the plot device. So that's why Emma Stone gets the W. Villains for each movie, 2 very different villains, but still. In the original, William Dafoe as Norman Osborn. I love William Dafoe as Norman Osborn. You could say that he has some cheesy moments and some goofy moments, sure, but I think that was by design. I think that's what they were going for. I think he pulls it off well. At the beginning, he comes off as just a genuine nice guy. He does. He is the father to Harry Osborn, who is Peter's best friend, and he's not the nicest to Harry. I mean, he's not a complete dick to him, but he does show more interest in Peter Parker because of Peter and his brains and how much better he does in school and how he wants to be a scientist. But then when his own experiment is having issues, he tests himself, and that's how he becomes the Green Goblin. And William Dafoe, I always thought, had the perfect face, the perfect look to play a villain, even a goblin. You almost hate the fact that they put a metal mask on him to cover his face, because you can even see behind the mask his eyes are acting. He's probably giving the performance of a lifetime, but we just can't see it. And the evilness, sure, it's a split personality. Sure, you have that scene where he's literally talking to himself, talking to the mask, and just he's talking in the mirror, and you see both sides. You see the good Norman and you see the bad Norman. William Dafoe pulls this off perfectly. And then him going off to get revenge on his board members who throw him out of his own company, and just a lot of his motivations make sense, even though he's going about it the insane way. In The Amazing Spider-Man, we have Rhys Ifans as Dr. Kurt Connors, aka the Lizard, and I don't think this actor does a terrible job. I don't blame him. I do think that the writing suffered with him because there's some deleted scenes with him and his kids and his family and how that gets worked into his backstory. But since that's not there, you can't really comment on it. So as it is, as the movie stands, he's just a guy. He's just a guy who happened to know Peter's father. So Peter meets him. You find out he's working on animal experiments and DNA splicing, and he's missing an arm. So obviously he wants to splice that DNA into himself to regrow his arm. It's fairly in line with the comics, sure. I guess it's just my biggest thing is that in the Sam Raimi movies, we set up a Dr. Kirk Connors actor and character, and we set him up for two different movies to eventually become the Lizard. And since we never got that, I always felt a disconnect with this actor because he's not the same actor from those old movies. I very much wish we could have somehow, some way gotten that to happen. The Lizard itself, when you see him as the Lizard, I think the look looks terrible. It does not look great. I hate that he doesn't have his classic snout look from the comic books. I know that sounds like a minor complaint, but for me it's big because when I watched the cartoons and I saw the Lizard, that's just what I saw. That's what I pictured. And when you get to see this character in a live action movie, who knows how many chances we're going to get this right. And I know that there is a version of the Lizard that does look more like this, and it's an early version of it. So I get it. It's not my favorite really. And his plot of just wanting to turn the people in the city into lizards, it's very standard, very much by the book. So the win for sure goes to William Defoe, the Green Goblin. Uncle Ben is a huge character for both movies and Peter's origin. In the original, he's played by Cliff Robertson, who I thought was very warm, very caring. The conversation that Uncle Ben has with Peter in the car when he drops him off at the library is very memorable. It has that line of with great power comes great responsibility, and you can't mention Spider-Man without people quoting this line. Everybody, it goes hand in hand. It's one and the same. It's one of the most quotable lines, quotable takeaways, and motivational like speeches from a character in a superhero movie is that scene right there. And then his death, the fact that his death is directly responsible because of Peter, what Peter does, how he lets the guy rob the place that he just was at and he doesn't do anything about it. He comes out and he chases the guy down, realizes that it's the same guy. This puts a huge guilt on Peter going forward and for how he goes about being Spider-Man, how he can't make a mistake like that again, how he can't be selfish, and why he does choose to be Spider-Man over everything else in his life. Huge stuff. In The Amazing Spider-Man, you have Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben, and Martin Sheen is a good actor, and so obviously just him being cast alone makes sense. And I do think he gets some decent scenes with Peter, but I don't connect as much. Maybe it's because at this point you're just waiting. You're waiting for him to die, and you're waiting for how they're going to do it differently. Even the moment where they have an argument and Uncle Ben has to give that similar speech about responsibility, but they do it in such an awkward way because they don't want to repeat the same phrase word for word. So they try to find a different way for him to spell out responsibility, and it just comes out for us. It just doesn't hit the nail like it should. And then his death. His death is the most uneventful like death for Uncle Ben because it's his own fault for why he dies. This man randomly robs a convenience store and then runs out, and then he bumps into Uncle Ben on the street, and then Uncle Ben finds the gun fall from this guy, and they look at each other, and then Uncle Ben just reaches for the gun. And look, I get it. It maybe is the right thing to do as far as, wow, this guy's dangerous. He has a weapon. Let me take it from him. But ultimately, it's none of your business, dude. Ultimately, you should have just said, whoa, I'm going to back away. Maybe I'll call the cops. Maybe I'll do this and that. Because they're struggling for the gun. They're going back and forth. They're pulling at this gun. And then the gun accidentally goes off and kills him. It wasn't in cold blood. It wasn't malicious like in the original movie. So you don't feel as bad. There isn't as much of a responsibility or a blame to put on Peter. It just doesn't go as well as it could have. So the original gets the win there. Side characters, since J. Jonah Jameson is not in the reboot, I have to mention J. Jonah Jameson in the original. J.K. Simmons, just some of the best scenes in that first film. This actor brings this character to life so well, so perfectly. It's the best representation, and there's a reason why he's not in the reboot, because you can't top this, and they knew that you couldn't top this performance. They didn't even bother to try to touch it or come anywhere close to it. So the character that I have to compare J. Jonah Jameson to is Captain Stacy, similar figure from the reboot, who is anti-Spider-Man, who is antagonistic towards him. He's the chief of police. Dennis Leary plays him, and I think he does play him very well. I think there's some great scenes. The dinner scene when him and Peter are going back and forth on Spider-Man especially is very memorable, but there's no comparison. There's nothing else you can really say, because J. Jonah Jameson gets the win here. The score for both movies, Danny Elfman does the original. Again, Danny Elfman he's proof that you can do a theme for a hero and it becomes synonymous. It's something that when I think of the Sam Raimi movies, when I think of the beginning intros and those opening first chords, it's Spider-Man to me. Listening to the soundtrack and hearing the theme being played and the triumphantness of it, it's perfect. Spider-Man, it matches very well for me. In the reboot, we have James Horner, who I think does a decent enough job, but not memorable. Nothing really stands out or sticks out as something that feels like Spider-Man, or something that I can even hum right now to think of. So Danny Elfman gets the win. Obviously, Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, is winning here. It has more wins, more check marks in their column. But just for shits and giggles, let's compare the biggest complaints. The biggest complaint in the original Spider-Man movie is that they go through high school way too fast. He's in high school for maybe, the first half hour, 40 minutes, and then he graduates. And that's like, whoa, wow, okay. Because in the comics, Spider-Man, a huge portion of his life, of his career as Spider-Man, is high school. And to brush by that so fast in the first movie seems surprising, and seems like almost they didn't know if they would get a sequel. So they thought, let's just get this out of the way, get him out of high school, and do as much as we can with this character. But in retrospect, it does seem rushed, and it does seem almost a wasted opportunity where we could have gotten more high school elements with Peter there. In the reboot, my biggest complaint is that it's another origin movie. We've already sat through an hour of an origin of Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and to do it again, even if you're somebody who doesn't think The Amazing Spider-Man is a bad movie, even if you like the movie and enjoy it, there's still a part of you who has to admit that it's still the same thing. You're still sitting there rewatching an origin, rewatching him getting bit by the spider, rewatching him develop these powers, rewatching him doing a lot of the same things that Tobey Maguire did just 10 years prior. That's another thing. 10 years is not enough time to redo this origin, or to sit through another retelling of this character. The big promotion, the big selling point, and the big thing that they tried to say was an excuse to redo the origin was the untold story that was in all of the posters, all of the trailers, the TV spots, the untold story of Peter Parker's parents. But then when you got to the movie, all you really found out was that his parents just abruptly left, dropped him off at the aunt and uncle's house, and left, and he never saw them again. That was it. I know they wanted to stretch it out into some of the sequels, and they wanted to build the mystery and keep it going, but the intrigue was not there for me. The mystery about his parents was not there, and it did not make me care about seeing a sequel just for that story. So guys, yeah, the original Spider-Man movie gets the win, in my opinion. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think? Do you agree that Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi version, is better than The Amazing Spider-Man? Or do you disagree, and do you think The Amazing Spider-Man is underrated, underappreciated, and should have won? Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Later!